Trump just handed his opponents the sharpest weapon they have seen in years. 2 hours ago, senior White House officials confirmed that the Trump administration is formally pressuring Canada to renegotiate the Safe Third Country Agreement, the bilateral treaty governing asylum seekers crossing between the two nations. Not through diplomatic channels, not through quiet backroom conversations, through public ultimatum. The demand is explicit. Canada must tighten its border enforcement posture, redirect migration flows away from American pressure points, and accept expanded American oversight of cross-border movement protocols. Or Washington will classify Canada as a non-cooperative migration partner, a designation that triggers automatic trade penalty reviews under existing executive authority. The message from the White House is unmistakable. Manage your border the way we want or pay an economic price. Mark Carney did not manage it the way they wanted. 2 hours ago, Washington thought it was exploiting a genuine Canadian vulnerability. 2 hours later, the White House is staring at a counteroffensive it clearly did not model. To understand what Carney did, you first need to understand what the White House thought it was doing. Canada's border situation is real. Roxham Road, the informal crossing in Quebec that became the epicenter of irregular migration into Canada, was officially closed in March 2023 following a protocol expansion to the Safe Third Country Agreement. On paper, the loophole was sealed. In practice, the closure pushed movement into genuinely dangerous terrain. Forests, rivers, remote crossings with no infrastructure. Human smuggling networks did not disappear. They adapted. Canada is now managing the downstream costs of that adaptation. The federal government is spending over $1.2 billion annually above baseline on irregular crossing management, asylum processing backlogs, emergency shelter capacity, and tens of thousands of pending legal claims. Quebec alone has characterized the federal response as a national crisis in slow motion. Washington looked at that picture and saw leverage. A country under fiscal pressure. A politically sensitive domestic debate. A prime minister facing questions about competence. The assumption inside the White House was straightforward. Apply public pressure on the STCA, frame Canada as a source of migration risk, and force Ottawa into a defensive crouch that produces concessions elsewhere on trade and resource access. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. It was also catastrophically wrong about the man sitting across the table. But before we break down exactly what Carney did, if this kind of analysis matters to you, hit subscribe and like this video. Now here is what actually happened. 40 minutes after the White House statement became public, Carney convened a briefing that was not defensive. It was surgical. He opened with one line that reframed the entire conversation before Washington had time to react. Canada has spent 2 years fixing a problem the United States helped create. And we have the receipts. Then he laid out 4 countermoves. First, Canada is formally requesting a full audit of American compliance with existing STCA obligations, specifically the provisions governing which asylum seekers the United States is required to accept returns of. American processing failures have quietly pushed claimants northward for years. The audit request transforms Canada from defendant to plaintiff in a single move. Second, Canada is accelerating coordination with the European Union and the United Kingdom on expanded migration processing frameworks independent of American cooperation. The British Home Office confirmed it had received a formal Canadian inquiry 2 days earlier. This was not improvised. Third, and this is where the fiscal argument becomes devastating, Carney released a full breakdown of what irregular migration is actually costing Canadian taxpayers. The number was not $1.2 billion. It was $3.7 billion over 3 years, once legal processing, housing support, and provincial reimbursement shortfalls are included. He stated flatly that Canada would be invoicing the United States for costs attributable to American southern border policy failures that redirected migration pressure northward, submitted through USMCA dispute resolution mechanisms. The room went quiet. Fourth, every American federal agency requesting Canadian border data and biometric sharing under existing intelligence protocols now faces a 90-day compliance review before transmission resumes. American agencies that rely on Canadian sensor networks along the northern tier lose operational visibility precisely when the White House is trying to demonstrate border control competence to its domestic audience. Here is why this stunned the White House completely. What Washington did not account for was that Carney spent the last 18 months preparing for exactly this scenario. The EU coordination was already underway. The USMCA cost attribution legal strategy was already drafted. The data sharing review protocols were already written. A senior administration official described the internal reactions simply. We expected a defensive press conference. We got a legal filing, a diplomatic reorientation, and a billion-dollar invoice. And this is where it gets serious. American southern border policy failures generated documented migration surges that moved northward into Canada. That flow did not happen in a vacuum. It happened in direct response to American policy choices. Carney did not make that argument emotionally. He made it with expenditure data and a formal legal mechanism. Republican senators in border states had nothing to say within the hour. They were too busy calculating what a successful USMCA cost attribution claim would mean for the next round of trade negotiations. So where does this go? Trump has 3 paths, and none of them lead where he intended. He can escalate and watch Canada's legal counteroffensive mature into formal international arbitration that puts American border policy failures on the public record. He can quietly walk back the designation threat and signal to every country watching that American migration leverage is a bluff Canada has officially called. Or he can try to negotiate, but Carney has made the terms public. Rescind the non-cooperative designation. Engage the cost attribution audit through proper USMCA channels. Accept that the Safe Third Country Agreement carries obligations running in both directions. Those are not concessions. Those are the baseline requirements for a conversation. 2 hours ago, the White House thought it was pressing on a wound. 2 hours later, it is discovering that Carney spent 2 years turning that wound into a door. Trump wanted to exploit a border crisis. He got a former central banker who understands fiscal architecture, legal leverage, and diplomatic sequencing better than anyone currently advising the White House. He wanted Ottawa on the defensive. He got Ottawa on the offensive with receipts, legal filings, and a coalition that moved faster than any White House model predicted. Mark Carney is not managing Canada's border crisis. He is using it. And Washington did not see it coming until it was already too late. If this opened your eyes, smash that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe so you do not miss what happens next.